welcome to my channel. My name is Doug and I'm back with another fountain pen review. And thank you to those who have supported my channel by liking and subscribing. Your support allows me to continue to bring you fountain pen reviews as I'm unsponsored on this channel, so thanks. Before we get to today's pen, I'm totally excited, I must say.
It's the fellow who couldn't wait for Christmas.
This has got to be the most exciting evening of the whole year, Christmas Eve, I must say. I can't believe it. I couldn't be more excited. I wish you were here now, you know. This waiting is like making me mental.
It's like Christmas morning because the pen I ordered back at Christmas time has finally made its way through Brexit and survived being beaten up, lost, transferred, out for delivery to the wrong box, back it again, out for delivery again, and finally left in a deep freezer until it was literally covered in frost and palladium with a 14 karat gold oblique medium nib. You'll be seeing the review for this fountain pen a week this Saturday, so stay tuned. This coming Saturday, we will be looking at this Ranga 4C ebonite pen that I've been writing with for the last couple of weeks. Spoiler alert, it's black. But today I'm going to look at a fountain pen on loan from local pen friend Janice. She generously loaned me her new Blue Do Flex Nib pen in this gorgeous blue swirl acrylic. When she emailed me last month and showed me photos of the pen she had ordered, although I'd never heard of Blue Do before, I thought this pen looked familiar. I searched through my viewing history on Etsy and eBay and discovered this Lorelei 691 with a very similar Flex nib. "Aha," said my inner voice, and I immediately ordered one to compare with Janice's. At first glance, they may seem identical, but there are important differences, even though I suspect that they have the same source. I'm going to compare these two pens with two other pens I will call Flexi, my Pilot Falcon and my Franken Zebra Jinhao 159. And a warning for those of you that expect to see some fancy calligraphy. Switch way now, lest your delicate Spencerian sensibilities be shattered beyond repair. So, let's see how these Flexi needles function right now. Next in the bag, we have a Lorelei, and I've got one other Lorelei, and it's a copy of a Pen BBS 308. The reason I got this pen was because my pen friend Janice has just dropped off this Blue Do fountain pen that she purchased recently, and it looks like this, and it has Blue Do on the outside, and it has a Flexi nib, and it came with 3 Flexi nibs. But when I saw this pen, I said, that looks familiar. And I thought I'd seen it somewhere before, and it, of course, is this Lorelei. And we shall see how close it is. Sleeve comes off. We have Lorelei. A slip top. Lorelei on the inside. That's nice sturdy box. And you can see why I was interested in comparing these two pens, because this one, that I think these are in the $80 range, and this was in the $20 range. Only this one has what looks like the same nib. Through the camera, they look the same. That collar, nib collar, is slightly different, but it'll be a very interesting A-B comparison between these two, what I consider to be, at first glance, identical pens. And what I'd like to do today is go over the parts and features of these two pens, show some size comparisons, some measurements, and then provide a writing sample. After the writing sample, please stay tuned as I will talk about what I like and what I don't like so much about these fountain pens. As I mentioned, I'm going to do some comparisons in the writing samples with this Pilot Falcon with a 14 karat gold soft fine nib, and this Jinhao 159 that I fitted with a Zebra G flexible nib. Let's look at the Blue Do first, shall we? So let's do the Blue Do that we do so well.
Now go to that voodoo that you do
Sorry, I couldn't resist. My friend Janice purchased this pen for $88 US, and it came with this lovely pen case for free. This is an awesome case. It has a magnetic closure and a foam insert in the bottom of the case. You can't see that, but it holds the end of the pen firmly in there so it doesn't rattle around. And the whole inside is lined with soft faux velvet, so no velvets were slaughtered in the making of this case.
Damn, I had something for this.
Did ya?
The outside of the case has this laced leather pattern, and I can't tell whether this is faux leather or real leather. It has no smell, so I suspect it isn't really leather. It only comes in black, so you'll have to get your red leather and yellow leather somewhere else. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather.
That was a crazy one, Dick.
It sure was, Ed. In this next blooper from Joni Loves Chachi, watch what happens when Scott Baio tries to say she sells seashells down by the seashore.
What does your mom do for a living?
She sells seashells down by...
Now on to the pen. Overall, it is a cigar-shaped pen in a gorgeous deep blue translucent acrylic with black and white swirls. From the top, we see that the cap is all one piece of acrylic that is machined inside with steps that line up with the section, and a small piece of acrylic that is glued to the inside to hold the clip. If I put a light against it, you might be able to see that the top of the pen is solid acrylic, and there is that small acrylic piece right there that holds that metal clip in place. And the clip extends directly out of the cap. We can see all this because the acrylic is nicely translucent, but dark enough to hide the guts of the pen so as not to detract from the overall look.
We just got back from that exhibit of those plasticized human cadavers, and some of those skinless chicks were hot.
The gold metal clip is a tapering teardrop design, which is very attractive, but extremely stiff. The cap tapers down to an almost imperceptible step where the barrel continues to taper down until we get to the rounded end. And we see Blue Do laser etched in large capital serif letters. I think it would be more tasteful if they had laser engraved Blue Do on the clip instead. This kind of makes it look like the pen used to belong to a chap named Phil Blue Do of the Philadelphia Blue Doos.
Everybody, this is Henry Graham, Mr. and Mrs. Sims, and our neighbors, Dr. and Mrs. Darrell Hitler.
Excuse me, you're not by any chance related to the Boston Hitlers?
No, we're from Glen Cove.
The cap unscrews with only 3/4 of a turn, which is awesome. And it reveals a tapering section made of the same acrylic and has a small flare towards the number 6 size gold-colored steel flex nib. The threads here at the top of the barrel are not sharp at all, nor is that step. Let's take a closer look at this nib. It has an elaborate breather hole, some horizontal hash marks engraved into the top, and a large B stamped into it. Along the sides of the shoulders, you can just see right there and right there are 2 slits that extend about 4 millimeters down the sides of the nib. This has a significant effect on how that nib flexes, as we shall see. And the feed is a uniquely shaped plastic. The nib and feed are part of a collar assembly, and the pen came with 3 nib units, but Janice told me that one of them was bad. It arrived on the pen itself, so I haven't tried this one. And this one is the 3rd nib. And I've tried this one, and Janice is right. This is the 2nd nib, and it's the best of the 3. The section unscrews to reveal an included standard international converter of good quality. It has a metal reinforced nipple, which is good, and Blue Do laser etched on the metal part that holds the piston in place. This pen will also take standard international cartridges, the short type. It'll take 1 in the section and 1 in the caboose.
I hate trains.
Don't be ridiculous. You love trains.
Yes, I do. Come on.
The cap posts deeply and securely, and because it's so light, it doesn't back weight the pen at all. On the contrary, this is nicely balanced to write with posted and isn't too long at all. Unposted, it is also plenty long enough and nicely balanced and comfortable. The section on this pen is fantastic. These threads are smooth and that step doesn't bother me in the least. It's nicely thick and I can find a number of places on this pen to grip. This pen retails for $88 US and includes the leather pouch at no extra cost. Now let's look at the Lorelei. I showed the very upscale box presentation with the Lorelei in the unboxing. Now when we see the two pens side by side, it's almost impossible to tell them apart.
We are not identical twins.
Oh, no?
No.
Well, I wouldn't be too sure, pal.
In fact, I've taken care to keep these two pens separate for fear of mixing up the parts with Janice's pen. Now, because they're almost identical, I'm going to focus on where they are different. Of course, the most obvious difference is that the Blue Do is branded on the barrel, where the Lorelei has no branding whatsoever. The clips are identical, so the only thing that distinguishes them on the outside is this Blue Do branding. The nibs are the first clue that they are different. So here we have them together. The Blue Do has this elaborate breather hole and these two 4mm long slits in the shoulders of the nib, where the Lorelei just has that elongated breather hole and there's no other slits or markings that are different. It looks like they're the exact same nib that has two different treatments. The next thing that's different is the Blue Do has a screw-in nib assembly unit that can be swapped with any of the other two nibs it came with, whereas the Lorelei is friction fit. They look exactly the same, but that collar does not unscrew. It might be stuck, but I tried everything to get it out short of breaking it. In unscrewing the sections, the Blue Do comes with an upscale converter with a reinforced nipple and a metal reinforcement on the assembly, whereas the Lorelei comes with one of these very inexpensive standard issue, standard international converters that you can get in bulk from China. And the final difference between these two pens is, of course, the writing, which we'll get to after looking at some size comparisons. And here is the Blue Do with the Lorelei right next to it, and with a Fully Wen Blue Danube, a Pen BBS 487, and a Moonman M800. Now let's look at them posted. And here they are posted, and you can see that the Blue Do and the Lorelei 691 are virtually identical. Every bit of the pen is identical, except for a couple of features on the nibs, which make a significant difference. And the Fully Wen Blue Danube isn't that much bigger than either of these two pens. The sections are almost the same, with a bigger lip on the Blue Danube. Now let's look at some measurements, and I'll be back with a writing sample. We're back with the writing portion of the review. This is Clairefontaine 90 GSM paper, and this is the Blue Do fountain pen, and it has a number 6 size steel flex nib. And you can see it's plenty wet. And the ink today is Iroshizuku. Konpeki. I'm not going to check the wetness because it's plenty wet. We don't need to worry about that. You can probably see it's seeping through to the top of the nib. That might be what those grooves are for as well, that long slit in that breather hole there. Those slits might collect ink, because every time I open this pen, it has a bubble of ink right there. And that still isn't dry, so I'm just going to blot it with some Visconti blotting paper so I can move on here. Here is the swatch for the Iroshizuku Konpeki, and here is some Robert Oster Soda Pop Blue and Leonardo Blue. So this is the third ink that I've had in this pen. Janice had a blue-green ink in it. I can't remember the name of it. Then I put some KWZ Azure number 5 in it. Both of those inks had flow issues with keeping up with the flex nib. So I replaced the ink again with an ink I know has excellent flow and wetness, and that's Konpeki, one of my favorite inks. It's a great test ink if you think you have some flow issues with your pen. Then put some Konpeki in it, and you know if it still has issues, it's not the ink. This is the second of the 3 nibs that were supplied. The first one didn't flex very well and was extremely scratchy, and the third, Janice claimed, was awful. I didn't try that one, but this one is very sharp, but it flows well and flexes with this ink. So that's what you want to see. So let's see what it does. So you see it's very wet and flexes very nicely. So you get a very thin line. It's very scratchy in this direction, well, in both directions, especially up. Very scratchy. There's no tipping material on these nibs. It's just sharp-edged steel, like steel needles. But of course, when you give it a push, look at how much line variation I can get out of that. So this nib flexes very easily. The feed tends to lag behind now and then, depending on how much you flex it and how fast you go. This nib is not for regular handwriting, I wouldn't say. You need to go slow with it if you're going to flex while you're writing. I'm just not very good at that. So you have to be very light and very slow and very methodical. As you see, I'm not very good at this. If you try to write with it normally, again, this is not a nib for taking quick notes, but from this sample you can see how if you want to flex it, it flexes very nicely. Pardon my furnace going on, it's minus 25 degrees Celsius outside right now. So when writing normally without pushing the nib, It's very, very fine and tends to scratch and stick in the paper, especially on the upstrokes. If you lighten your pressure and almost give it a feather touch on the upstrokes, it's possible to write fairly normally, but it takes a lot of getting used to. You see, I can probably write with it if I tried to be very, very careful with it, but it is still very, very scratchy. You also need to have, if you want to flex the nib, a fairly low angle of attack so you can allow the nib to flex a little bit more. It sucks. The nib doesn't suck. My writing sucks. So let's try out the Lorelei and see how it does. So this is the Lorelei with a number 6 steel flex nib, and this one has the same ink in it. Takes a lot more pressure to make it flex. It doesn't flex as far. I'm getting the thin lines, but let's see how far. See, I can only get that much flex out of it. So I think it's because of those two slits on the shoulders that allow the front part of that nib to really spread the tines aside to get that very thick line. So it takes a lot more to push this nib, but this nib is a lot smoother. And I can actually write with it. Very fine, of course. Now, one thing I failed to mention, with the Blue Do, the line thickness on the Blue Do, when it's writing, to that wide line right there, is, by my Richard Binder chart, 0.3 millimeters to 1.1 millimeters, which is a Western extra fine to a double broad, or a Japanese extra fine to off the charts. And you can see what I mean about the feed not being able to keep up. The feed gets starved, and then it gushes, and then it gets starved again. So now let's take a look at my Franken Zebra 159. This Zebra G nib is very fine and exhibits all of the behavior of the Blue Do, only it's not as flexy as the Blue Do. And the feed has real trouble keeping up, because remember, that feed is not designed, this is a Jinhao feed, it's not designed for flexing. Once you get it going, it isn't too bad, but regular writing, see, is a problem. For me, anyway. You can see it's a messy business. Now let's look at my Pilot Falcon. This is the Pilot Falcon, and this has a SF nib, or soft fine, 14 karat gold nib. And this is not a flex. This is not designed as a flex nib. It's a very, very interesting nib, and it does have a good amount of line variation, as you can see. And what's more, relatively smooth, especially relatively smooth to the 3 nibs I've just tried here. So that adds some really nice character to your writing. If you like a really, really fine nib that has some spring and some character when you push it. And back to our Blue Do for our quote. So let's get to what I like and what I don't like about this fountain pen. First, let's talk about the Blue Do and the Lorelei without consideration of the nibs. Other than the quality of the converter and the branding on the Blue Do, these 2 pens are identical. This is what I suspect is going on here. On the Blue Do website, the company founder, Jeffrey, says he developed the company to make flexible fountain pens to help improve people's handwriting. He says he spent many months and many failed prototypes developing these pens. My thinking is that Jeffrey used his Bachelor of Physics degree experience to experiment with altering a Chinese stock steel flexible nib to allow it to flex better than a Zebra G. Once he had this breather hole and side slit design developed, he commissioned Lorelei to make his pens to hold his nibs. Lorelei is a well-known Chinese OEM pen maker. I think the proof of this theory is in the clear evidence that these 2 pens are identical in every way except for the nibs and the converters. But what about the nib? Is the Blue Do Flexi nib worth the $88 US? Again, I'm no Flexi expert, but I can say that of these 4 pens, the Blue Do is the best at flexing. It might be better if it had an ebonite feed to help keep up. Perhaps $88 is steep for a Chinese pen with a steel flexible nib, but this is a gorgeous acrylic, and the pen is extremely comfortable, and you get this wonderful leather-like magnetic closure pen case. So it is by no means a bad purchase. However, the Lorelei is the same gorgeous, well-balanced, and comfortable pen. Its only problem is that the flex nib isn't that great. But this whole pen is only $28, and with a nib swap of a number 6 steel nib, this becomes an excellent fountain pen. In fact, I'm going to swap it right now and then try it. And we're back with the swapped nib. I have this Mini Fude fine nib from Shuiyao. It is almost identical to the Pen BBS Mini Fude fine nib. It is appropriate too because Shuiyao is the brand of nib that Lingmo Lorelei uses on their Pen BBS clone, the Lingmo Lorelei 019. Here's mine right here, Shuiyao. So, this pen is now useful to me. At least I can write with it. Let me close up on that nib. There it is. Shuiyao Mini Fude. And let's see how it writes. Oh, that's certainly much better. Very nice. And very, very wet. So, what are my recommendations about these pens? If you're interested in a better experience than a Jinhao 159 with a Zebra G nib, then the Blue Do might work for you too. I've heard great things about the Fountain Pen Revolution flexible steel nib, but my experience with their pen just plain sucked.
But this whole place sucks.
My experience with the Conklin Omniflex, a pen that cost a lot more than the Blue Do, also sucked big time.
That's right, it sucks.
I hear they've replaced the Bock Omniflex for a Yovo Omniflex on that Conklin, but the jury is still out on that.
It is merely an attempt to influence this intelligent, broad-minded, and most intellectual jury.
Hey, you're in a court, not in the woods, Tarzan. Cut it out. Come on.
Perhaps a Lorelei 691 with an FPR flex nib. That's an option. If you just want to write normally with some good amount of line variation, then my recommendation is the Pilot Falcon. It's a marvelous fountain pen. It's a bit fine for me, but in using these 4 pens over the last couple of days, I much prefer my Falcon over any of them. If you have a spare number 6 size nib you like, and you like the looks and the feel of the Lorelei, like I do, the Lorelei 691 is a wonderful pen for only $28. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you for watching. And that's all she scratched.